All right, buckle up for a deep dive
Oh, I like that.
into a world of spirituality,
Yes.
controversy, and some serious accusations.
Sounds intense.
It is. We're looking at the Science of Identity Foundation, led by Chris Butler, a figure who's been called a spiritual master.
And a fallen sannyasi.
You got it.
Wow.
You've sent us a ton of info, articles, court documents, even forum discussions, and they all paint a complicated picture of Butler.
Yeah, it really is complex.
His teachings
Right.
and the organization he founded, Sankaf.
It's fascinating how intertwined these threads are, Butler's journey from Hare Krishna follower to leading his own movement,
Right.
the accusations of abuse within Suf, and then there's this persistent claim that he somehow misinterpreted or distorted the very tradition he claims to represent.
Okay, so let's unpack that journey.
Sure.
You mentioned Butler started as a Hare Krishna follower.
Right.
What can you tell us about his early days and how he ended up founding Suf?
Well, Chris Butler was initiated into the Hare Krishna movement back in 1971 by its founder, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada.
Wow, so this is going way back.
It is. He received the name Siddhaswarupananda,
Okay.
and for a while he seemed to be a dedicated follower, but over time, his teachings started to diverge from traditional Gaudiya Vaishnavism.
Okay, so we need to pause here for a second, because I know you just threw out the term Gaudiya Vaishnavism.
Right.
But
Yeah.
for those of us who aren't, theology scholars,
Of course.
can you break that down a bit? What exactly is it?
Yeah.
And why does it matter in this story?
Good point. I should clarify.
Thanks.
Gaudiya Vaishnavism is a devotional tradition within Hinduism that emphasizes the worship of Krishna as the supreme god.
Okay.
It's known for its chanting, temple worship, and a strong emphasis on the guru.
The guru, the spiritual teacher.
Exactly. Now, within Gaudiya Vaishnavism, there are specific doctrines and practices
Right.
that are considered orthodox, meaning they're accepted as the traditional teachings.
Got it.
Butler's interpretation. According to many scholars, and even some former followers, veered away from these traditional teachings.
And that's where the controversy started.
Exactly. That's what led to the controversy.
So what were some of those deviations?
Sure.
What made Butler's teaching so different from the mainstream Hare Krishna movement?
One of the biggest points of contention was Butler's claim to the title Jagad Guru.
Jagad Guru. Okay.
In the Vaishnava tradition, a Jagad Guru is considered a world teacher, someone who has achieved a very high level of spiritual realization.
Oh, wow.
Traditionally, this title is bestowed by a council of senior Vaishnavas, basically other respected spiritual leaders.
So his peers.
Yeah, exactly. But Butler, his followers declared him Jagad Guru.
Interesting.
Which was a pretty significant break from tradition.
That sounds like a bold move, especially in a tradition that places so much emphasis on lineage and the authority of senior teachers.
It was very bold.
Did this cause friction within the Hare Krishna community?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
It was seen as a power grab by some.
Yep.
A sign that Butler was elevating himself above the established hierarchy of the movement.
Right.
And it wasn't just the title.
Oh, so there's more.
There's more, yeah.
Okay.
Butler's teachings themselves began to differ from the traditional Gaudiya Vaishnava doctrines in subtle but important ways.
So can you give us an example of where his teachings diverged?
Sure. One key difference was his emphasis on the idea of subliminal indoctrination.
Subliminal indoctrination.
This idea basically suggests that by exposing people to certain practices, like listening to Butler's chanting or eating prasadam, which is food offered to Krishna,
Got it.
you can influence their spiritual development even if they don't consciously understand what's happening.
Oh, yeah.
Many traditional Gaudiya Vaishnavas found this concept to be manipulative and at odds with the principle of free will.
Oh, I see where they're coming from.
Right.
That's pretty intriguing. I can see how that idea could be controversial, especially if you're talking about karmas, which I understand is the term Saf uses for non-believers.
Right.
You're essentially saying they believe they can influence the spiritual paths of people who haven't even chosen to be part of their movement.
Exactly. And that's one of the key accusations against Saf.
Yeah.
That they use these methods to draw people in without their full knowledge or consent.
That's pretty intense.
It is.
So we've got this controversial figure. He's claiming a lofty title, promoting some unconventional ideas.
Right.
And on top of that, there are these allegations of abuse within the organization he founded. This is getting complicated fast.
It is, and it gets even more complicated
Oh, no.
when you consider Butler's break from the traditional sannyasa vows.
Okay, explain that.
So sannyasa is a renounced order of life in Hinduism.
Okay.
It involves taking vows of celibacy, detachment from material possessions,
Right.
and dedicating oneself fully to spiritual pursuits.
Okay, so like a monk.
Kind of, yeah, but in the Hindu tradition.
Got it.
Now, Butler was a sannyasi, but then he got married.
Wait, so Butler was a sannyasi, but then he got married. I thought that wasn't allowed.
You're right, it's a major contradiction.
Yeah.
In traditional Gaudiya Vaishnavism, a sannyasi breaking his vows is a serious transgression.
Right.
It's seen as a sign that they've fallen from their spiritual path.
Oh, wow.
Butler married one of his disciples,
Okay.
which further alienated him from the mainstream Hare Krishna movement
Yeah, that makes sense.
and solidified his image as a fallen sannyasi in the eyes of many.
I imagine that caused quite a stir,
It did.
especially among those who once respected him as a spiritual leader.
It did. For many, it was the final confirmation that Butler had gone astray.
Wow.
This act, combined with his other controversial teachings and claims,
Right.
led to him being ostracized from the Hare Krishna community
Wow.
and further solidified his position as the head of his own separate movement.
Okay, so let's delve into that movement,
Okay.
the Science of Identity Foundation.
All right.
From what I've gathered, they focus heavily on meditation and yoga
Right.
as paths to spiritual enlightenment.
Yes. On the surface, SEF presents itself as a peaceful spiritual organization dedicated to helping people achieve self-realization.
Okay.
They offer classes on meditation, yoga, and philosophy, and they promote a lifestyle of vegetarianism, nonviolence, and ethical conduct.
It sounds pretty standard so far.
It does.
What are some of the more unique aspects of SIF that set them apart from other spiritual groups?
Well, one thing that stands out is their organizational structure and
Okay.
how they operate. So SIF centers often operate under various names,
Really?
sometimes referencing locations like
Right.
the Australian School of Meditation,
Oh, interesting.
or using names like Czaitanii or Gauranga.
Okay.
These are names associated with important figures in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which might give the impression of traditional lineage.
Even though SIF is broken away from that tradition.
Exactly.
So it's like they're trying to maintain a connection to the tradition while simultaneously distancing themselves from it.
Right.
That seems a bit, well, deceptive, doesn't it?
It definitely raises questions.
Yeah.
And this ties back to the allegations of subliminal indoctrination.
Right, right.
Remember how we talked about SIF's belief that they can influence people's spiritual development through practices like chanting and eating prasadam?
Right, that was pretty wild.
Even if those people aren't aware of the underlying philosophy.
Yeah.
Well, some former members claim that SIF centers use this concept to subtly draw people in.
How so?
By offering free yoga classes or meditation workshops,
Okay.
they expose individuals to Butler's teachings and practices
Right.
without explicitly revealing their connection to SIF
Oh,
or the full scope of their beliefs.
So someone might walk into a yoga studio thinking they're just getting a good stretch. But they're actually being introduced to Butler's ideology without even realizing it.
That's the accusation. And it's important to remember that karmists, or non-believers, are seen as potential converts in SIF's worldview.
Oh, interesting.
So there's this underlying motive
Okay.
to expose them to these practices with the hope of influencing their spiritual development and potentially bringing them into the fold.
That's a lot to take in.
It is.
We've got this complex history, these controversial teachings, and now these accusations of subtle, almost manipulative recruitment tactics.
Right.
And we haven't even gotten to the heart of the abuse allegations yet.
It's true.
Where do we go from here?
Well, the abuse allegations are where things get really dark.
Okay.
We need to approach this topic with sensitivity.
Of course.
But the accounts from former SIF members, especially those who attended SIF boarding schools, paint a very disturbing picture.
All right, well, let's dive into those allegations then.
Okay.
What are some of the specific accusations of abuse within SIF?
The allegations range from emotional and spiritual abuse to physical neglect.
Wow.
And even claims of sexual abuse.
All right.
Many former students describe a culture of fear and obedience within the boarding schools,
Okay.
where questioning Butler's authority was strictly forbidden.
That's chilling.
It is.
What kind of impact did this environment have on the children who were sent to these schools?
The accounts are heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Former students describe feeling isolated, emotionally manipulated, and deprived of basic needs.
No, that's awful.
They talk about being forced to listen to Butler's lectures for hours on end.
Wow.
Being denied proper medical care and being punished harshly for minor infractions.
This is terrible.
Some even allege physical abuse at the hands of SIF's staff.
Some of the quotes attributed to Butler in these forums are really unsettling.
I agree.
For example, there's one where he allegedly says, as soon as you realize you have nothing to offer me and you don't know anything, maybe then I can teach you something. That doesn't exactly sound like a compassionate spiritual teacher.
It definitely raises concerns about his leadership style.
Right.
And the power dynamics within SIF.
And that's just one example.
Right.
There are many other alleged quotes and testimonies that paint a picture of Butler as an authoritarian figure who demanded absolute obedience and controlled nearly every aspect of his followers' lives.
It's a disturbing pattern.
One name that keeps coming up in the sources is Rama Ranson.
Yes.
Can you tell us about him and his connection to SIF?
Rama Ranson is a former SIF member who has been incredibly vocal about his negative experiences within the organization.
Right.
He claims he was sent to the SIF boarding school in the Philippines as a child.
Oh, wow.
And suffered years of emotional, spiritual, and physical abuse.
That's just awful.
His story, along with the accounts of other former members, provides a glimpse into the potential for harm within this seemingly peaceful spiritual group.
It sounds like we're only scratching the surface of a very complex and disturbing story.
We are.
What other layers of this onion are we going to peel back?
Well, from here, things get even more tangled.
Oh.
We need to explore SIF's connection to a controversial multi-level marketing company called QNet.
Okay.
The Gabbard family's deep involvement with the organization.
Right.
And the allegations of SIF using its influence to gain political power.
Wow. Okay. It seems like every time we pull on one thread,
it does.
We uncover even more complexity.
Right.
And intrigue.
Yes.
I'm definitely ready to dive deeper into these next layers.
Let's get to it then. Before we jump into those other layers you mentioned, I think it's worth spending a bit more time on the abuse allegations.
Okay.
Specifically, the alleged sexual abuse that reportedly took place at the SIF boarding school in the Philippines.
Yeah.
This is sensitive territory.
Of course.
But the sources you provided include some very serious accusations that can't be ignored.
You're right. We can't just gloss over this. What can you tell us about these allegations and the individual involved?
The sources name Siddha Bellord, Butler's stepson, as the alleged perpetrator.
So this is within the family?
It is.
Wow.
Former students claim that Bellord had special privileges at the school and held a position of authority over the other students.
Right.
They allege that he used this position to groom and abuse young boys.
That's horrific.
It is.
Are there any specific accounts or details about what allegedly happened?
I won't go into graphic detail here.
Okay.
But the sources include testimonies from former students who claim they were sexually abused by Bellord.
Oh, wow.
They describe a culture of fear and silence that prevented them from speaking out at the time.
Yeah, that makes sense, unfortunately.
They felt trapped.
Right.
And powerless. Fearing retaliation from both Bellord and the SIF staff.
This is incredibly disturbing.
It is.
If these allegations are true. It speaks to a systemic failure within SIF to protect the children in their care.
I agree.
Were there any attempts to address these allegations or hold those responsible accountable?
That's a complicated question.
Okay.
SIF has denied these allegations, and to my knowledge, Bellord has never been formally charged with any crimes related to these accusations. However, the fact that these stories have surfaced and are being shared by multiple former students raises serious concerns about the organization's handling of abuse allegations.
It raises questions about the organization's priorities.
Absolutely.
Did they prioritize protecting their own reputation over the safety and well-being of the children entrusted to their care?
Right. It's a difficult question to grapple with.
It is.
But it's one we have to ask.
We do, yeah.
Absolutely. And it connects to a larger pattern we see with SIF.
Okay, what's that?
Which is this tendency to dismiss criticism or allegations as attacks from disgruntled former members or individuals with ulterior motives.
Right, so anyone speaking out against them must have a bad reason for doing so.
Exactly.
Okay.
They often frame these accusations as attempts to discredit Butler and undermine the organization's spiritual mission.
That's a convenient way to deflect responsibility and avoid accountability.
I agree.
But it also makes you wonder, if these allegations are truly baseless,
Right.
why not address them head on?
Yeah.
Conduct a thorough investigation and clear the air.
Exactly. That lack of transparency only fuels suspicion and makes it harder to discern the truth from the propaganda.
All right, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the connection to QN.
Okay.
This is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
And honestly, a bit confusing.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tangled web.
So can you explain what QN is?
I'll try.
And how it's allegedly linked to SIF?
QNet is a multi-level marketing company, or MLM,
MLM, okay.
that operates in various countries around the world.
Right.
They sell a variety of products.
Okay, like what?
Ranging from health supplements to travel packages.
Oh, wow. So it's all over the place.
It is, yeah,
Okay,
to luxury goods.
Interesting.
Now, MLMs often operate on a model where distributors or independent representatives earn commissions not only on their own sales,
right, that makes sense,
but also on the sales of those they recruit into the network.
Okay, I've heard of MLMs.
Yeah.
They can be pretty controversial, right?
They can be, yeah.
Some people say they're basically pyramid schemes.
You're right. That's a common criticism.
Okay.
The line between legitimate MLMs and pyramid schemes can be blurry.
Yeah.
And there have been numerous allegations that QNet operates more like the latter.
Like a pyramid scheme.
Right.
Okay.
The focus on recruitment over actual product sales is often a red flag.
Right, right. So how does SIF fit into all of this?
The sources allege that SIF members are strongly encouraged, if not pressured, to participate in QNet. Some believe that Butler himself sees QNet as a way for his followers to achieve financial success, which in turn benefits SIF.
That seems like a conflict of interest, doesn't it?
It does.
If SIF is supposed to be a spiritual organization focused on detachment from material wealth, how do they reconcile that with promoting a business model that's all about financial gain?
It's a question that many critics have raised.
Right.
And it gets even murkier when you consider the allegations that profits from QNet flow back to SIF.
Wow.
Either through direct donations or through complex financial arrangements.
Is there any evidence to support these claims?
That's where things get tricky.
Okay.
There's a lot of speculation and circumstantial evidence, but proving a direct financial link is challenging.
Right.
However, the sources highlight several individuals who are prominent in both SIF and QNet, suggesting a deeper connection than just a casual affiliation.
You mentioned Joseph Bismark earlier.
Yes.
He's one of those figures, right?
Yes. Joseph Bismark is a key player in both SIF and QNet.
Okay.
He holds a high-ranking position within QNet's corporate structure and has been a dedicated follower of Butler since childhood.
Wow, so this goes way back.
It does.
Okay.
His history with Butler adds fuel to the speculation that SIF is actively involved in QNet's operations.
So we have this potential overlap between a spiritual organization and a potentially exploitative business venture.
Yeah.
What are the implications of this connection?
Well, if SIF is indeed encouraging its members to participate in QNet, knowing that the company has faced accusations of operating like a pyramid scheme, it raises serious ethical concerns.
Yeah, for sure.
It suggests that they might be putting their followers at risk of financial harm in the pursuit of their own financial gain.
It's like they're using their spiritual authority.
It seems that way.
To convince people to invest in a risky business venture and potentially profiting from their losses.
That's a harsh assessment.
It is.
But it's a conclusion that some have drawn based on the evidence presented in these sources.
It's definitely a troubling aspect of this story.
It is.
And it gets even more complicated.
Yes, it does.
When we bring the Gabbard family into the picture, they have a long-standing connection to SIF.
Right, absolutely. The Gabbard family, particularly Mike, Carol, and their daughter Tulsi, have been involved with SIF for decades.
Okay.
Critics see their political success as being deeply intertwined with Butler's influence and the unwavering support of SIF members.
Tulsi Gabbard, especially, has had a remarkable political career.
She has.
She was the first Hindu U.S. member of Congress.
Right.
Ran for president.
Yep.
And now there's talk of her being a potential nominee for Director of National Intelligence.
Yeah, she's been in the spotlight quite a bit.
That's quite a trajectory.
It is a fascinating rise to prominence. However, her connection to SIF has raised questions about potential conflicts of interest and undue influence. Critics argue that Butler's influence extends beyond the spiritual realm and into the political arena, potentially shaping Tulsi Gabbard's decisions and actions.
That's a bold claim.
It is.
What evidence do they point to?
Well, for one, there are allegations that SIF members were directed to support Mike Gabbard's political campaigns, both financially and through active volunteering.
Oh, wow.
Some sources claim that a significant portion of his campaign contributions came directly from SIF members.
If true, that would suggest a level of coordinated political action that goes beyond simply exercising one's right to vote or donate to a candidate.
Right.
It hints at a more organized effort to leverage SIF's resources and membership to achieve political goals.
That's the concern.
Yeah.
And it raises questions about the separation of church and state, so to speak.
Right.
Is SIF using its religious influence to push a particular political agenda?
Right.
And if so, what are the implications for democracy and fair elections?
This is getting heavy.
It is a lot to consider.
And it's not just about campaign contributions.
Right. It is not.
There are also concerns about Tulsi Gabbard's stances on certain issues, aligning with Butler's views, even when those views are controversial.
Exactly.
For example, her early opposition to same-sex marriage, which aligns with Butler's conservative stance on LGBTQ plus rights, has been a source of contention.
Yes, although she has since evolved on this issue. Critics point to it as evidence of Butler's lingering influence.
But couldn't you argue that her change of heart shows she's capable of independent thought and action, regardless of Butler's influence?
That's certainly a possibility.
Yeah.
People evolve and their views change over time. However, the close relationship between the Gabbard family and SIF makes it hard to completely dismiss the possibility of Butler's influence playing a role in her political decisions.
It's a tough one to untangle.
It is.
And her strong defense of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who's been accused of promoting Hindu nationalism, only adds another layer of complexity.
It does.
Her support for Modi, coupled with her Hindu faith and SIF background, creates a perception, at least among some critics, that her political alliances are shaped by religious and ideological factors that might not align with the best interests of all her constituents.
It's a delicate balance to navigate.
It is.
Particularly when dealing with such sensitive and potentially divisive issues.
So we have this incredibly complex web of relationships.
We do.
Allegations and potential conflicts of interest.
It's true.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces and distorted images.
A very messy puzzle.
Where do we even begin to make sense of it all?
I think the first step is to acknowledge the limitations of the information we have. We're relying on a collection of sources with its own biases and perspectives. It's important to maintain a critical eye and to avoid jumping to conclusions.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
We're not here to judge or condemn. Our goal is to present the information as clearly and objectively as possible, to connect the dots. And to allow our listeners to draw their own conclusions.
Exactly. We're providing a framework for understanding this complex situation. But ultimately, it's up to each individual to determine what they believe and how they interpret the evidence.
I think that's a responsible approach.
I hope so.
So, with that in mind, what are some key takeaways from this deep dive so far? What are the big picture questions we should be asking ourselves?
One crucial takeaway is the potential for abuse within spiritual organizations.
That's a sobering thought.
It is.
It makes you question how we can better protect ourselves from such exploitation. Especially when dealing with groups that claim to offer spiritual enlightenment or personal transformation.
It's a valid concern.
Another key question is how we navigate the blurred lines between religious freedom, political influence, and financial interests.
Absolutely.
SIF's connection to QNet. And the Gabbard family raises concerns about the potential for undue influence and the misuse of religious authority for personal or political gain.
It's a tangled web, isn't it?
It really is.
Religion, politics, and money all intertwined in ways that can be hard to untangle.
So what can we as individuals do to better protect ourselves?
Good question.
And to hold these organizations accountable?
I think it starts with education and critical thinking. We need to be aware of the potential for abuse and exploitation within spiritual groups, and to approach these groups with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Don't just blindly accept what you're being told.
Exactly.
Do your own research.
Yes.
Ask tough questions. And be wary of organizations that demand unquestioning obedience or discourage dissent.
Trust your gut instinct. If something feels off, it probably is.
Yeah.
And if you see something that seems wrong or harmful, speak up.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to challenge authority or to advocate for those who are being exploited or abused.
That's powerful advice.
Yeah, I hope so.
We all have a responsibility to protect ourselves and others from harm.
Yes, we do.
Especially within organizations that hold positions of power and influence.
Absolutely.
Speaking of power and influence, let's dive into the allegations of Seth using its influence for political gain.
Okay.
This seems to be a major point of contention.
It is.
And it raises some important questions about the role of religious organizations in the political arena.
Big questions.
Yeah.
You're right. This is where the lines get even blurrier.
Right.
And the potential for conflict of interest becomes even more apparent.
Okay.
We need to examine the evidence,
Right.
analyze the claims,
Right.
and determine whether SIF has crossed the line from religious expression to undue political influence.
Let's get to it. Tell me more about these allegations and what they mean for SIF's operations
All right.
on the Gabbard family's political careers.
Hmm.
All right, let's dig into these allegations of SIF using its influence for political gain.
Okay, sure.
Where do we start?
Well, we've already touched upon Mike Gabbard's political campaigns and the claims that SIF members were directed to support him financially and through volunteering.
Right, right.
Some sources even allege that Butler saw Mike Gabbard's political aspirations as a way to advance SIF's own agenda.
That's a pretty bold claim.
It is.
Is there any evidence to suggest that SIF was actively trying to influence policy or legislation through Mike Gabbard's political career?
It's difficult to say for sure.
Right.
While there's no smoking gun.
Right.
The close relationship between the Gabbard family and SIF, coupled with the allegations of coordinated campaign support, raises questions about the extent of SIF's involvement in the political process.
It's like that old saying, follow the money.
Yeah.
If a significant portion of Mike Gabbard's campaign funds came from SIF members, it's reasonable to question whose interests he was representing.
Precisely, and it goes beyond just campaign finance. Critics argue that SIF members were encouraged to pursue careers in government and law enforcement, potentially as a way to gain influence within those institutions.
So the idea is that SIF was trying to build a network of influence within the government, almost like a shadow power structure working behind the scenes.
That's the theory put forward by some critics.
Okay.
Whether it's true or not is debatable,
Right.
but the idea itself is certainly unsettling.
Yeah, I can see that.
It raises concerns about the potential for a religious organization to exert undue influence on public policy and decision-making.
And then there's Tulsi Gabbard's political career.
Yes.
Which is even more high profile than her father's.
Absolutely.
She's been on the national stage for years.
She has.
And her connection to SIF has drawn a lot of scrutiny.
It has.
Her political trajectory is fascinating.
It is.
But it's difficult to separate her personal beliefs and actions from the potential influence of SIF and Chris Butler.
It's hard to know for sure.
As we mentioned earlier, her early stance on LGBTQ+ rights, particularly her opposition to same-sex marriage, aligns with Butler's views.
Yes.
While she has since changed her position.
She has.
The initial alignment raises eyebrows.
It does.
But couldn't you argue that her change of heart shows she's capable of independent thought and action?
Sure.
Regardless of Butler's influence.
That's certainly a possibility.
Yeah.
People evolve and their views change over time.
Right.
However, the close relationship between the Gabbard family and SIF makes it hard to completely dismiss the possibility of Butler's influence playing a role in her political decisions.
It's a tough one to untangle.
It is, and her strong defense of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who's been accused of promoting Hindu nationalism, only adds another layer of complexity.
It does.
Her support for Modi,
Yeah.
coupled with her Hindu faith and SIF background, creates a perception, at least among some critics, that her political alliances are shaped by religious and ideological factors that might not align with the best interests of all her constituents.
It's a delicate balancing act.
It is.
And it's easy to see how those perceptions of conflict of interest could arise.
Absolutely. And it speaks to a larger issue in modern politics.
Which
is the role of religion and personal beliefs in shaping public policy.
Right.
Where do we draw the line between religious expression and undue influence?
Yeah, it's a tough question.
It's a question that we as a society are still grappling with.
It's a conversation that needs to happen.
It does.
Especially as we see the lines between religion, politics, and even business becoming increasingly blurred.
I agree. We need to be vigilant and discerning to ask tough questions.
Yes.
And to hold those in power accountable, regardless of their religious affiliations or spiritual beliefs.
So after diving deep into the world of Chris Butler, Sif, and the Gabbard family, what are your final thoughts? What are the big picture lessons we can learn from this complex and often disturbing story?
I think one of the most important takeaways is the need for critical thinking and skepticism.
Okay.
Even when dealing with groups or individuals who present themselves as spiritual or enlightened.
Don't just take things at face value.
Exactly.
Question authority.
Yes.
Seek multiple perspectives. And be wary of groups that demand unquestioning obedience.
Right.
Or isolate their members from the outside world.
Exactly. And remember that true spirituality should empower individuals, not control them. It should promote compassion and empathy.
Yes.
Not fear and manipulation.
It should also encourage critical thinking and questioning.
Absolutely.
Not blind faith and acceptance.
Precisely. And while religious freedom is a fundamental right, it shouldn't be used as a shield to protect abusive practices or to justify unethical behavior.
That's a crucial point.
It is.
We need to hold individuals and organizations accountable for their actions, regardless of their religious beliefs or spiritual claims.
I think this deep dive has also highlighted the potential for harm when religious organizations become entangled with political power and financial interests.
Those entanglements can create conflicts of interest and undermine the integrity of both the religious institution and the political process.
It's a reminder that we need to be vigilant in safeguarding the separation of church and state, and to be wary of any attempts to use religious influence for personal or political gain.
Well said. To your listeners, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
We've explored the history of Chris Butler, the controversial teachings of Sif, the allegations of abuse, the connection to QMAT, and the Gabbard family's involvement.
A lot to unpack.
It's a complex story with many layers.
It is.
And we encourage you to continue your own exploration of this topic.
There are many resources available online.
Oh, like what?
Including articles, documentaries, and personal testimonies from former SEF members.
Wow, so there's a lot more out there.
There is.
Okay.
Take the time to research, reflect, and form your own conclusions.
Ultimately, the goal of this deep dive was to provide you with the information and context you need to make informed decisions.
Yes.
And to engage in thoughtful discussions about these important issues.
We hope this deep dive has been enlightening. Even if it's been a bit unsettling at times.
It has been, but it's been really fascinating.
It is a fascinating but complex story.
Remember, knowledge is power.
It is.
And with that power comes the responsibility to use it wisely and to advocate for truth, justice, and the well-being of all.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
Great advice.